Welcome, and as long as you guys can see my screen, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. As I said, I'm Tim Adams, and today we're going to be talking about how to create certainty and confidence during these times of uncertainty and times of chaos, right? And first and foremost, I just want to thank you for being here. And a lot of people here, I don't know. I don't recognize a lot of you. I do recognize one person I met in another room earlier, but that is it. And I'm so grateful that you are here. So thank you for being here. I appreciate that. And I like interaction. So if you can just give me a thumbs up, can give me in the chat. Yes, you can hear my voice. That would be great. The agenda here is pretty simple today. In our short amount of time together, my goal is to make a big impact on you, your life, so that you can turn around and make a bigger impact on others, your business, your relationships, and hopefully the tribe, the community that you're doing in the following ways. First, I want to make sure that you can that you have the opportunity to give you confidence where there was once uncertainty. Second, I want to help you have clarity where there was once confusion. And third, I want to give you a certainty where there was once doubt. And lastly, I want to unlock within you this true potential you have to make this mark on the universe, right? We're all here for a reason, and we all have something special to give. And the intent is to hopefully be able to let you do that. And if nothing else, my hope is to at least give you some hope that there is more, that you can always do more, have more, be more, right? And does that sound good to you guys? You guys good with that? Thumbs up? All right. So due to the short nature of this presentation, I'm going to not be able to go as deep into a lot of the information, and I'm not going to sit here and bore you with who I am necessarily, but I do want to give you a little background of my background because it creates a context to what we're going to be talking about. And so in the last 30 years, I have been at the tip of the spear of performance. I've worked with all these organizations off to the left of the screen here. I've actually coached for those organizations. I've been featured in these areas, and some of the results that I've gotten for my clients, you can see on the page. And the reason I share that is because what I'm about to share with you has been tested, it's been revealed, it's been developed and refined in this space, right? And so what I'd like to start with is trying to understand where you are today, right? And so I like to talk about being above the line or below the line. And when you're above the line, you're in this area. But when you're below the line, we find ourselves down here, and it's not necessarily a great place to be. Yet it's a great place to really, truly be. And we'll talk about that in a second. But some of us are bleeding out. Some of us have lost loved ones. Some of us can't connect with loved ones because they might be in the hospital. It's a bad place to be, right? And then there's others of us that are in this waiting and take a wait and see space. And as we're doing that, we may not be as productive as we once were. So we're still actually below the line, even though we're kind of in this maintenance phase. And then there's the stop the bleeding. You're actually doing something. You're kind of skimming above the line, if you would. And then there's those that are leading, and they're making a massive difference. And what that looks like is if we, reevaluate kind of what's happened with the coronavirus. We were here, and then what happened was an event, right? We had the coronavirus that happened here. And what that did for some of us is it brought us down into this space, right? And I call that the freeze space. And then there's some of us that came down, and like I said, we've been kind of in this kind of flight stage. We're not quite back where we were, and yet we're not quite continuing a downward spiral either, right? And then there's the individuals that are kind of fighting it, right? They might have dropped, but then they popped back up, and now they're kind of bouncing up in this space here. They're not thriving necessarily, but they're not necessarily in trouble either. And then there's the few that have been able to capitalize on the situation, that this situation hasn't done much to them. It's kind of status quo, but the reality is they're actually doing well, and they're kind of up in this space. And I call these individuals, well, let me go back to this space. The blue is what I call the fight, right? And this green is like fight, but it's kind of a hybrid of it, and I call it the lead. And this is where you're leading the stress, right? So if you're familiar with the stress adaptation cycle, Hans Selye, you've got the fight, flight, and freeze mechanism, right? That's a sympathetic response to stress. We had a stressor here, right? Everybody has experienced it. It's been a global stressor. And what are we doing, and what is our response? So if you could put in the chat, where are you? Are you in the freeze? Are you in the fight? Are you in the flight? Are you in leading? Just throw in the chat real quick so I know kind of where you might be, so I know kind of how to speak to you moving forward. Fight, fight, good. Lead, love it. That's great. Fight, awesome. Great, guys. That's great. So what I'm going to do next is kind of give you a framework on how I look at this realm of confidence, certainty, and clarity, and do it from this perspective of mastery. Having done what I've done for the last 30 years and have created amazing results with my clients, mastery has been something that has been really important to me. And what I found in the process of mastery is that we can go from being incompetent to competent, right? And the process that I've used over the last 30 years to do that is one where I talk about leading stress. The other component that I talk about is this concept called the dip factor. And the last component is the space between. Okay. Now, leading stress is really this concept of where you get out in front of stress, where you actually have the ability to have more influence and impact over stress. And so what happens is you take a proactive approach to managing the stress adaptation cycle. Does that make sense? So we're not managing stress and being reactive to what's going on and putting a Band-Aid on ourselves. What we're doing instead is we're creating greater capacity. We're creating greater margin. We're creating this bigger engine to handle more load. Does that make sense? This next factor, the dip factor, is really all about how do we get the lessons that we are destined to get. How do we get them? And what I have been doing is pushing my clients to this limit, to their edge, putting them in a space where they have to be forced to reconcile that lesson. So the lesson's there. It's just we oftentimes ignore it. And it's not until we're put into an environment like we've been put into in where there is a massive stressor that we don't know how to handle it. And then we're forced to sit with what is, right? And so the dip factor is all about getting that lesson and exploring the boundaries of where we know our limits are and really figuring that out, right? And then this last piece is the space between. And the space between is this place of integration. It is this place of connectivity to yourself, to a higher source, to God, if that's who you call it, to source, to universe, whatever you want to call it. It's the space between that, but it's also the space between what we do, each breath we take, every rep that we take, every movement that we make. It is that space in between each of them. And what are you doing in between that space? Because it's the space that actually creates the context of whether you know something is good or bad. And that's just the relativity of it, right? Because nothing is good or bad. It is in relationship to something else. Is that making sense? And so when we go a little deeper into this, right, what we're looking at is when you combine lead stress with the dip factor, right? And you get this adaptability from lead stress and you get your lesson from the dip factor. What happens is we become less fearful of the unknown, right? And because you have that, there's no amount of pressure that can move you off you, right? This is where we become confident. When you are aligned with you, then you have this confidence about you that's unwavering, right? And it's the experience that we have in doing this is we end up committing to doing things that are more uncomfortable for us, where we're getting out of our comfort zone more often, that we're committed to growing, we're committed to learning, we're committed to expanding who we are when we have this combination, right? And oftentimes it's allowing us to dig a little deeper. It's allowing us to process faster and process through that lesson, the muck, the whatever you want to call it, faster. And as a result, we have more contribution during this space. So there's more contribution in that realm, right? The problem is if you're missing the space between, then you're missing a key ingredient of integration, right? So what happens by missing this integration, and you can start down a road of committing and improving yourself, right? And you start working out, you start doing things that you think are going to be bettering yourself. And then what happens is we might work out, but we don't eat well, or we might commit to our business, but we let our relationships slip. We're not whole, right? Because we're missing the connectivity part of the puzzle. So when we combine the dip factor with the space between, and we're getting our lessons and we're getting that connectivity, what we're doing then is we're able to have this connection with our God, we're having this connection with ourselves, and this creates more certainty, right? And this is a place where when you are so aligned with who you are from that dip factor and you're aligned with your source, then it's easier to be able to move forward and do what you need to do. So this is the space where you put down that alcohol drink that you were doing, or the smoke that you were going to take, and you have that conversation and you confront the conversation, that difficult conversation that you've been avoiding, right? Because now you know it's more meaningful to take care of what needs to be taken care of instead of stay in avoidance, right? And this is where we really start to lean into ourselves. And so we get up early to take care of our bodies. Maybe we go for a run. Maybe we go to the gym. Maybe we start doing a yoga session. Maybe we do meditation. Whatever it is, we start down that path, right? Because we know in that space that you can only give what you've got in you to give, right? And if your tank is empty, you have nothing to give. So as a result of this commitment, we become more centered, right? So, whoops. So here we are, whoops, sorry. We're more centered. All right. So, but the problem with that is if you're missing the lead stress and you're missing that adaptability, then you don't become as resilient, right? So what happens is when you get, you have the ability to adapt and be more resilient by having the lead stress, but when you don't have it, that's when we are more fragile. That's when we get knocked off course a lot more easily, right? So we go from standing up for ourselves to cowering and falling back into the pattern that we've been doing previously, right? So we fall back into our old ways. We slide back into our comfort zone and we get comfortable being comfortable. And we're not willing to go explore the edges. We're not willing to continue to adapt. So we lose the ability to be resilient and we end up being fragile because of that, right? And then the last piece of this is when you integrate and you combine the ability to connect from the space between with the ability to accelerate your adaptation from leading stress, then that allows you to be able to commit to doing things more steadfastly, right? And choose to do the things that you haven't done or that you don't want to do, right? And this is because we now have clarity, right? So we get more clear in this realm. And when we have that clarity, it's so much easier for us to start creating the habits that we need to be able to form the behaviors that are going to serve us, that are going to continue to help us grow. Things like drinking more water, spending more time with the family, turning off our cell phones or our electronics, and actually connecting more deeply with our family and our children, right? And it's allowing us to have that, you know, it's not just about more time, it's about the quality of that time with the people that we're with. And we're able to connect more deeply with those around us when we do this. And as a result of all of that, we become more consistent, right? So now we have this consistency. So now that you have the consistency, the problem is if you don't have the dip factor, but you have the lead stress and the space between, you're still missing this core essence of who you truly are, right? So what happens is that you're saying all the right things, you're doing all the right things, but you're still out of alignment. Like you can have the right messaging, you can have the right drive, but if you're still not connected, you're disconnected from this, then you're going to be like the up dog, right? Where you get that shiny object and you go squirrel, you're getting distracted and thrown off course, and you're being dismissed because people aren't able to connect with you fully, right? It's because you're not you. You're missing the dip factor. You're missing getting the lesson and getting to you. Is that, you guys get that? And I'm willing to bet that if you have any one of these problems or any of these issues that I've just mentioned, that you're missing one of these pillars, right? So you might be missing the lead stress. You might be missing the dip factor. You might be missing the space between. And if you're aware enough, and if you're honest enough with yourself, then you're willing to say, I might not be performing as optimally as I thought I was in that space. And as a result, I'm not getting the results that I think I should be getting. Fair enough? And if you're not sure about that and you're just sitting there going, I know I'm not getting the results I need or I should be getting, and I just can't put my finger on it, then you probably are missing one of these components. All right. Any questions? I know we're butting up against the hour right now, and I want to kind of reach out, check in with you guys. Where are you? Any comments, questions?
I had a question.
Yes.
In terms of if you identify a gap,
Yep.
as you just from a analogy perspective, and what you get, or where you're basically aroused by is an exogenous shock. Do you? How does that work? Where there's a turning point where yes, you've had that realization, but you pick up on a certain I don't know, influence on the outside to make that change. And then it happens instantly and you can keep consistent at it.
Okay. So great. That's a great question. And if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying when you make an intervention occurs at an inflection point.
Yes.
And the inflection point doesn't mean you right the ship, you do a 180. It doesn't, that's not the norm. Most of the time, what happens is once you make an intervention, you continue down the path, right? And it's not until and if the degree to which you intervene will cause you to come back up to, if this is baseline, this line here is baseline, that's the baseline. And as well as that intervention was created, it will create what's known as a super compensation. This is where you adapt, right? Does that make sense? But the misconception is when I intervene, people think, oh, I bounce straight up. That's not, that's very rare. And sometimes if you're good at processing, that can happen. The reality is from a physiological and psychological perspective, it takes a little time to right the ship. There's a rhythm to taking your sympathetic and parasympathetic system and changing it. It's like a teeter-totter. The sympathetic fight, flight, freeze mechanism, when it's elevated, can only be offset by upregulating the parasympathetic nervous system. And when that's what the intervention is how can I change the nervous system in order to make the adjustment so that I can actually, if I can, ultimately, I want to shorten the time between the stressor that occurred here, and the time where I can get into adaptation. Make sense?
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was a great question. So obviously there's a lot more to this. If you're interested in learning more about this process or going deeper into this, there's plenty of components. I mean, there's actually 9 different components to this, and each of these components then are broken out into an additional 9, and it's very layered, this process, right? But if you can understand, well, here's my contact information. If you can understand how to lead stress, how to get out in front of it, how to manage the adaptation process so that you can shorten this cycle and do it in half the time, then you are setting yourself up for not only having more confidence and certainty, you're setting yourself up to be more anti-fragile. You're going to be able to withstand things to where, for some of you that are already leading, if you're already leading, that means you're already taking care of yourself. And if you're already taking care of yourself, then how can you accelerate that adaptation even further, right? And that's the whole premise behind, you think pro athletes, CEOs, and all these individuals that are at the very top of their game, why do they all have coaches? It's because they want to push themselves even further, right? So if you're in that growth mode, it's about managing that gap, right? And if you're in the survival mode, it's about, look, grab a hand, catch your breath, get safe, get stable, and then let's get you above the line, right? Like, we're not even talking about getting you above the line yet. We're talking about getting you a breath, like stop the bleeding, like things need to change today. Make sense? I know I'm over my time, so I want to respect the next speaker. And if you have questions, email me, reach out to me. I would love to go deeper into this conversation with you guys.